Good evening and thank you for joining us. Americans woke up to scenes of destruction once again today. Anger has been unleashed coast to coast after the death of 46-year-old George Floyd and the overall mistreatment of Black Americans at the hands of police. The scale of the protests now rivaling historic demonstrations of the Civil Rights era and the Vietnam War. Let's go to the U.S. Capitol now and our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Proskow, who's been following protesters as they wind through the American Capitol. Set the scene for us, Jackson.
Robin, we're about a block away from the White House, where all afternoon long a relatively peaceful protest had been taking place. There were some small incidents of pepper spray being deployed, but things had been calm. Then the group started to move. Their destination, we believe, was the nearby Trump Hotel, but they ran up against police, and police refused to let them move any further. Just in the past few minutes, we've had tear gas and flashbangs deployed on the crowd, plenty of projectiles back and forth, and at times it touches off a stampede of protesters. They come running to get away from that. So really, it's sort of at a stalemate right now, and I think people are waiting to see where this is all going to go.
What kind of a police presence is there?
A huge one, to put it simply. There are many overlapping police forces in Washington. The White House compound itself is protected by Secret Service. Out here, it's D.C.'s police that are now maintaining the barricades and keeping people from moving in certain directions. But D.C. has also activated its National Guard, and those National Guard troops have been called up to provide additional support, especially overnight tonight.
Jackson, you've been watching this all day. What was it like earlier? We saw that you got caught up in some of the crowds.
Yeah, this is what happens. It's sort of a back and forth. So things can be very, very peaceful. And you see scenes where the entire crowd of thousands will take a knee and really have a poignant pause in remembrance of George Floyd. And then a few agitators will come forward. They might start throwing water bottles or bricks at police. Police fire pepper spray. And of course, when you're in a tightly packed crowd like this, that sets off panic and people start running. That's what happened to us earlier. And it keeps happening throughout the day here.
Has the National Guard been called in as it has in other cities in America?
It has. It was called in last night to defend the White House specifically, and the National Guard has now been called up to work with D.C. police to protect the streets here tonight. It is something we're seeing in cities across America for a specific reason, and that is that local authorities feel it can be a way to diffuse tensions between the local community and the local police force by instead bringing forward the police. Brett, watch your back here. So we've just got some police moving through the area here, Robin.
Now, Jackson, all of this is happening on Donald Trump's doorstep. What is the White House saying about this?
Well, the president is inside the White House tonight. He has to be aware of what's happening right outside, but he continues to tweet statements meant to agitate the crowd. He tweeted in all caps a short time ago, "Law and order." He's retweeting people who are calling for a heavy-handed approach. And time again, he has also branded all of the protesters as being what he calls Antifa, which is meant to symbolize extreme left-wing protesters. He today called for those people to be declared a terrorist organization, but it's not a formal organization. So it seems to be a slippery slope to essentially criminalizing anyone who is participating in these protests.
Mayors from right across the country are calling on him to address the nation to appeal for calm. What is he doing about that?
And reportedly, there is a split within the White House itself as to how the president should respond to this. There are calls for him to step forward, take a leadership role, and issue that national appeal for calm, but he's not doing that. He's essentially throwing rocks in from the side, calling for counter-protests from his own supporters at certain points. So the question is, where does this go? Is the president even a factor at this point because he has essentially been invisible?
Okay, Jackson Proskow in Washington. Thanks, Jackson, and stay safe. These protests have taken place in at least 76 cities across the U.S. And as you just saw in Washington, the demonstrations have degenerated. In some parts, the authorities have lost control of a crisis that is growing. As Jennifer Johnson reports, they're preparing for another night of unfettered violence.
Scenes of destruction in cities across America after another night of rioting, looting, and fires. Thousands again ignored Minneapolis's curfew and took to the streets. Police met them with tear gas and rubber bullets. The fury ignited after 46-year-old George Floyd died when Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin knelt on his neck for almost 9 minutes.
I do worry about this. I worry because my human emotion, the visceral response to the erasing of the humanity of George Floyd.
George Floyd!
Chauvin has been charged with Floyd's murder, but the victim's family and protesters are also demanding charges against the 3 other arresting officers.
I'm willing to walk, scream, do whatever I need to do to let people know that I'm tired of this.
Minnesota officials promising this investigation is not over and the other officers may face criminal charges.
The other individuals are not out of the woods. The investigation is ongoing, and we expect to hear something in the fairly recent near future.
Floyd's death continues to spark angry, violent protests. In New York, thousands took to the streets in a city still under lockdown from the COVID-19 pandemic. Police cars set on fire, officers attacked. 2 NYPD vehicles drove into a crowd of protesters holding a metal barricade, knocking many of them over.
Clearly, we need to do a full investigation and look at the actions of those officers and see what was done and why it was done and what could be done differently.
Cities from Philadelphia to Los Angeles look like war zones. In Washington, D.C., an angry mob tried again to get over barriers outside the White House.
The thing that we're struck by is that it was an organized group that appeared more bent on destruction than on protest.
Local leaders promising to find who is responsible for the thousands of businesses that have been destroyed or looted.
Our law enforcement partners, our police department, and I know our state law enforcement partners are working very hard to get to the bottom of exactly who that is and what exact agenda is behind that.
But the agenda for many is an end to police brutality and racism. And once again, curfews will be in place, National Guard soldiers on patrol, and police and combat gear out in force, as these riots show no sign of ending anytime soon. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.